The view from the top floor of the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco was supposed to represent the pinnacle of my achievement. I was 35 years old, a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to the meticulous, often thankless, discipline of environmental geophysics. My life was defined by the silent, powerful language of the Earth, predicting shifts in tectonic plates, modeling the deep movement of subterranean water tables, and most importantly, creating highly complex predictive models for long-term climate impact. I was Dr. Amelia Stone, and my professional identity was forged in the unyielding crucible of scientific truth. My most significant creation, the work that consumed my last 7 years, was a revolutionary deep subsurface climate stability model, DSCSM, a proprietary algorithm that could forecast the environmental impact of large-scale industrial projects with unprecedented accuracy, predicting potential ecological disasters decades in advance. This model was the ultimate shield against corporate negligence, and it was my key to reshaping the future of green energy development. The man who stole that shield and turned it into a weapon of mass environmental destruction was Robert Vance. Robert was more than just the CEO of Terra Nova Global, the environmental consulting firm where I worked. He was my professional mentor, the charismatic, silver-haired figure who had sponsored my research and promised me a partnership, a father figure who saw my genius and pledged to protect it. I trusted him implicitly, foolishly believing that his corporate charm was rooted in the same commitment to scientific integrity that drove me. When Robert needed the DSCSM model for a crucial confidential bid on a massive lithium mining project in the remote Wyoming basin, I gave him the full, unrestricted administrative keys to the algorithm, along with all the proprietary geological data, under a handshake agreement that guaranteed me 50% ownership of the resulting intellectual property and a seat on the executive board. The betrayal was immediate, spectacular, and fundamentally devastating. The mining project, codenamed Project Chimera, was massive, promising billions in profit, but posing catastrophic environmental risks due to the basin's delicate permafrost and unstable subsurface hydrology, risks my DSCSM model explicitly warned against. Robert Vance didn't use my model as a shield, he used it as a scam. He manipulated the DSCSM data, reversing its input parameters to falsely show minimal environmental risk, and presented the resulting forged report to the project's powerful private investors, securing the massive $500 million funding package. The fraudulent report, stamped with the fraudulent certification of my proprietary model, was the keystone of his criminal success. When I discovered the forged report, a chance finding during a late-night server check, the shock was so profound that I physically staggered. I confronted Robert in his luxurious corner office, the setting sun casting long, accusatory shadows across the city. "Robert, what you did is criminal. The DSCSM explicitly flagged the Wyoming basin as a site of catastrophic hydrological risk. You reversed the output. You falsified the data and committed fraud." I remember his reaction with chilling clarity. He didn't deny it. He simply leaned back in his leather chair, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Of course I did, Amelia. Your model was inconvenient. It showed risk. Investors demand certainty. I fixed your science to meet my reality. And as of this morning," he continued, delivering the final, absolute blow, "the DSCSM is legally registered as an asset of Terra Nova Global under my sole name. You, Dr. Stone, are merely a disgruntled former employee." He had secured the legal paperwork during the 3 days I was incapacitated with a migraine, using a clause in my initial employment contract I had overlooked, a clause granting the company full ownership of any code created during working hours. He then deployed a meticulous, multi-layered character assassination campaign. He circulated rumors within the tight-knit geophysics community that I was a brilliant but paranoid mind who suffered from incapacitating anxiety and had made baseless accusations against the firm. He blackballed me completely, ensuring I couldn't get another research grant or a job in the entire San Francisco Bay Area. I was fired for gross insubordination, my reputation poisoned, my savings quickly depleted by a failed, hopeless legal challenge to the fraudulent patent. I was left completely ruined, the scientific truth I lived by silenced by a master manipulator, eventually forced to sell my belongings and face the unthinkable. Homelessness on the streets of the city that once promised me everything. Robert Vance had turned my life and my life's work into ashes, but as I wrapped myself in a thin blanket in a dark alley, the deep geological certainty of the Wyoming basin's instability, the truth my model predicted, became the seed of my terrible, slow, and absolute vengeance. The first 6 months were the deepest pit of my existence. The experience of sudden professional homelessness, of going from a respected doctor to a non-person, is a trauma that strips away everything but the bare core of survival. I lived the brutal reality of the street, the cold, the hunger, the shame. Robert Vance's poisonous narrative, the paranoid, unstable Dr. Stone, was so effective that even the local community shelters were wary, seeing me as a potential liability. Yet, it was in this absolute void that the final, most potent version of my purpose was forged. My scientific mind, stripped of the distractions of success, was now singularly focused on the problem of Robert Vance. I realized that my most valuable asset wasn't my bank account or my reputation. It was the unassailable scientific truth about the Wyoming project that only I possessed. Robert could steal my model, but he could not change the geology. I knew that Project Chimera, the lithium mine, was his ultimate vulnerability. My DSCSM model had predicted that the mining activities would destabilize a fragile subterranean aquifer system, leading to a catastrophic environmental collapse, a slow-motion disaster Robert had signed his name to. My revenge would not be through the corrupt legal system that failed me. It would be through the unyielding, objective language of geology, regulatory compliance, and public exposure. I would not fight him on his corporate stage. I would fight him on the unshakable stage of the Earth itself. My first act of reconstruction was to find a base of operations. I used the last $400 from selling my grandmother's old gold locket to secure a ticket and minimal supplies. I left San Francisco, the city of my defeat, and traveled to the remote high desert plains of Wyoming, the very site of Project Chimera. The move was pure strategy. I had to be on the ground, collecting the physical, irrefutable evidence that would prove the scientific malice of Robert's forged report. I secured a tiny, dilapidated, abandoned cabin miles from the nearest town, living off minimal cash and the sheer force of my resolve. I was homeless in a different way, but I was no longer defeated. I was Dr. Amelia Stone, field investigator, fueled by a terrible, clear purpose. My investigation was a masterpiece of scientific patience. I wasn't just observing. I was using my deep expertise to anticipate the exact signs of impending disaster my model predicted. I spent my days trekking the hostile terrain, meticulously cataloging the subtle initial environmental shifts Robert's fraudulent report claimed were non-existent. My instruments were minimal: a refurbished GPS unit, a cheap digital camera, and the vast internalized knowledge of the DSCSM model. I focused on two critical areas: the subsurface water outflow zones and the seismic monitoring reports being filed by local, independent geological services. My hypothesis was simple: Robert would have ignored, and even actively suppressed, any initial reports showing the geological instability my model predicted, violating a clear set of Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, regulations. My first success came after 4 months of grueling fieldwork. I found a distinct silica-heavy discharge in a remote stream, far exceeding predicted levels, a clear indicator of subsurface fracturing near the projected mine site. The data, captured with precise GPS coordinates and timestamps, was undeniable proof of geological disturbance directly caused by the initial construction phase. This wasn't merely a flaw. It was a breach of core regulatory agreements Robert had personally signed. I had the first piece of unassailable evidence, the geological truth that would eventually shatter his corporate shield. I took the raw data, used my limited resources to connect to a satellite uplink at the nearest public library, and channeled the unassailable truth toward a single objective target: a renowned, integrity-driven environmental law firm in Washington, D.C. The fight was no longer personal. It was scientific and legal, and I was about to unleash the truth that would expose Robert Vance's smiling facade as the corporate fraud he truly was. I know this might just be a story in your ear, a voice detailing betrayal and survival, but if anything in my journey resonates with your own fight for truth and dignity, you need to know you're not alone. We are building a community here, One founded on the unshakable belief that the truth, no matter how complex, will always find a way to the surface. Every time you hit that subscribe button, you're casting a vote for scientific integrity and the power of the underdog. And please, tell me in the comments below, what's the scientific or factual truth you've had to fight hardest to prove in your own life? Your stories matter. They give power to the evidence. Thank you for being here. The submission of the silica-heavy discharge data, along with my meticulously cross-referenced field reports, was the first domino. The environmental law firm, Greer and Associates, immediately recognized the magnitude of the regulatory breach and the legal weight of the data, especially coming from a source who clearly understood the geological context. The lead attorney, Ms. Vivian Greer, a sharp, unforgiving advocate for environmental integrity, initiated a discreet investigation. She assigned a senior investigator, Mr. Thomas Klein, to covertly verify my findings and, more critically, to assess the financial viability of taking on a behemoth like Terra Nova Global. My scientific competence, which Robert Vance had mocked and erased, was now my unassailable credential. I spent the next 4 months working in complete, silent coordination with Thomas Klein. I did not ask for money or recognition. I simply provided the scientific guidance necessary to navigate the complex subsurface geology of the Wyoming basin. I directed Thomas to the precise locations where the initial construction had impacted the hydrological network, showing him exactly where to collect samples and how to interpret the localized seismic data. My internal knowledge of the DSCSM model, the very model Robert had stolen, allowed me to anticipate Robert's forged environmental impact report's weak points and reveal the truth of the basin's instability. The work confirmed my deepest fear. The mining project was not merely a risk. It was a guaranteed ecological disaster, a truth Robert had willfully buried for profit. The evidence mounted, growing into a comprehensive legal and scientific indictment. Thomas Klein, using his authorized credentials, gained access to local government land use permits. My guidance allowed him to spot a glaring, fundamental violation of the State Water Rights Act, a technicality Robert's team, focused on the large federal contracts, had carelessly overlooked. The original project agreement required Terra Nova Global to maintain a specific baseline flow in a downstream agricultural river, a baseline that my silica data showed was already being dangerously compromised by the initial destabilization. This was a direct, ongoing regulatory breach, providing Vivian Greer with the legal standing to file a devastating, immediate injunction against the project. The fight was no longer about historical plagiarism. It was about current, unassailable law and unfolding environmental reality. Vivian Greer finally called me into her temporary field office, a modest trailer miles from the mine site, for a face-to-face meeting. She looked across the small metal table at me, her gaze piercing. "Dr. Stone, we have enough. Your scientific competence is beyond reproach. You were right about the hydrological risk. We're filing a massive federal injunction next week to halt all construction based on the EPA and State Water Rights Act violations. Now we need the truth about the fraudulent report. We know you know how it was forged." I took a deep breath, the cold desert air sharp in my lungs. For the first time since my exile, I was asked to speak the truth, not about my scientific findings, but about Robert Vance's moral corruption. I detailed the betrayal, the DSCSM model, the 3-day illness, the stolen patent, and Robert's chilling smile as he erased my reputation. I showed her the original written contracts Robert had violated, the only physical documents I saved. Vivian Greer's reaction was not pity, but cold, professional fury. Robert Vance committed a spectacular fraud on his investors, the government, and the environmental community. He violated a sacred trust. Dr. Stone, we are going to file a full, unassailable civil suit, demanding the immediate invalidation of his patent on the DSCSM model, citing the underlying fraud. We will not just stop his project, we will discredit his entire scientific authority and ensure he is financially ruined by the investors he defrauded. Your revenge will be absolute, and it will be delivered by the sheer force of the law and the unyielding truth of the earth. The strategy was clear. Attack him on 3 fronts: legal, financial, and scientific, forcing the system that protected him to turn and consume him completely. The filing of the federal injunction was a controlled legal explosion designed for maximum impact. Greer and Associates targeted the precise vulnerabilities I had identified: the violation of the State Water Rights Act due to compromised baseline flow, and the clear EPA violation regarding the silica discharge from the subsurface fracturing. The immediate effect was devastating. All construction on Project Chimera was instantly and forcibly halted by a federal marshal's order. The sudden halt cost Terra Nova Global tens of millions in immediate contractual penalties and sent a violent shockwave through the private equity firms that had funded Robert Vance's venture. His shield of corporate success was immediately ripped away. Robert Vance's reaction was predictably furious and arrogant. He launched a public relations war, giving a televised interview from his San Francisco office, confidently dismissing the injunction as a baseless, politically motivated attack initiated by fringe environmental groups, and crucially, making a subtle, sneering reference to the unstable former employee, Dr. Stone, who clearly has an ongoing obsession with my success. He still believed his polished narrative of my instability would be sufficient to deflect any serious inquiry. He didn't know I was already on the ground, working with the lawyers who would dismantle his entire empire. He thought I was broken and homeless. He didn't know I was the chief geological witness in a devastating federal action against him. The second decisive blow came with the filing of the civil suit. Vivian Greer used the combined weight of my affidavits, my original DSCSM contracts, the state water rights violation, and the initial silica data to file a massive lawsuit on my behalf. The suit demanded not only $100 million in damages for professional defamation and patent infringement, but also the immediate and permanent invalidation of the DSCSM patent, citing the underlying data fraud. The suit was designed to achieve financial ruin and complete scientific and legal erasure of his fraudulent claim. The legal action was so comprehensive, so scientifically supported, that the investors, seeing the clear path to ruin, began to panic. I was finally able to leave the desolate cabin in Wyoming and return to civilization, though not to my old life. Vivian Greer established a secure small apartment for me near the firm's main office in D.C., where I was placed under a protective legal shroud, preparing for my formal deposition. The atmosphere was one of quiet, methodical warfare. I spent my days meticulously preparing the scientific testimony, cross-referencing my original DSCSM model's output with the fraudulent report Robert had filed, creating a precise, visual, and unassailable presentation of his scientific crime. The pressure on Terra Nova Global became insurmountable. The halt on Project Chimera, coupled with the massive civil suit and the looming threat of an EPA criminal investigation, caused the project's lead private equity firm to demand Robert Vance's immediate resignation and a complete forensic audit of the entire company, including its financial statements. Robert, facing internal rebellion and external ruin, finally called me, not to beg, but to threaten. His voice, once smooth and charming, was tight with venom and absolute fear. "Amelia, I know you are behind this. If you don't drop the civil suit, I will release every piece of damaging personal information I have on you. I will ensure you spend the rest of your life in total obscurity." I looked out my window at the DC skyline, the symbol of the federal power I was now wielding. "Robert," I replied, my voice steady, my tone cold and clinical. "You've already done your worst. I am simply exposing the geological truth you committed fraud to bury. The earth does not forgive a lie, and neither do I." Robert Vance's last-ditch attempt at intimidation was a desperate, predictable failure. He had nothing left but empty threats, and my legal team, Vivian Greer at the forefront, was unyielding. The sheer volume of scientific and regulatory evidence we had amassed, combined with the catastrophic financial implications of the halted Project Chimera, left Terra Nova Global with no defense. The private equity investors, desperate to cut their losses and mitigate their own liability, forced Robert Vance to resign as CEO, stripping him of all executive power and his remaining stock options. He was left with the immediate financial ruin he had so arrogantly planned for me. The civil lawsuit quickly moved from confrontation to negotiation. Robert's defense team, seeing the mountain of evidence, conceded the fraud. The settlement terms, dictated by Vivian Greer and myself, were absolute and designed for the complete financial and professional restoration of my life. I demanded, and received, the immediate, full, and public transfer of the DSCSM patent, into my sole name, Dr. Amelia Stone, a massive 9-figure financial settlement covering all lost wages, professional damages, and the cost of the original legal challenges, and most importantly, a legally mandated public statement issued by Terra Nova Global, explicitly acknowledging the invaluable scientific contribution of Dr. Amelia Stone, and retracting all prior claims regarding my professional instability. The moment of the final legal signing was held in a secure office in New York. Robert Vance did not attend. Instead, he was represented by a nervous, low-level attorney who slid the notarized patent transfer and the settlement check across the table. The symbolic victory was immense. The man who had stolen my future and cast me out had been legally and financially defeated by the truth he thought he could silence. The final paperwork, ensuring my immediate financial security and the return of my intellectual property, was signed. I was no longer an exiled geologist. I was the multimillionaire founder of a new era of ethical environmental consulting. But the final critical act was not the money. It was the public statement. 2 days later, Terra Nova Global issued the court-mandated public announcement. It was a spectacular, self-immolating corporate confession. The statement detailed the misguided leadership of Robert Vance, explicitly retracted the fraudulent environmental report, and formally recognized Dr. Amelia Stone as the sole and undisputed inventor of the DSC-SM model, praising its unparalleled scientific integrity. The press, having tracked the story, ran explosive features on the corporate fraudster versus the homeless geologist, cementing my status as the hero of scientific integrity, and Robert Vance's as the villain of corporate greed. The man who thought he was safe in his success was publicly humiliated, his professional integrity destroyed by the unyielding scientific truth he had fought so hard to suppress. The foundation of his entire life was now a monument to his spectacular, self-inflicted ruin. Wow, you've stayed with me through the absolute nadir of betrayal and witnessed the precise, unassailable victory of scientific truth over corporate fraud. My journey from homelessness to full vindication proves that no lie can withstand the relentless pressure of evidence. If you felt that powerful surge of justice, that burning necessity to see integrity restored, then you know why these stories matter. We are a community built on the shared belief that truth and meticulous effort will always win. If you haven't already, please take a moment to gently tap that subscribe button and affirm the power of the evidence. And now, my deepest, most heartfelt invitation. Think about the system that tried to silence you, a former boss, a corporate entity, or a community. Share your story of fighting that system and the small, factual evidence that gave you strength. Your authenticity is our greatest strength. Also, please suggest any deeply emotional, human-focused themes you want to see explored next. Thank yourself for being a genuine, authentic part of this fight. The financial settlement and the public retraction were the physical and professional anchors I needed to rebuild my life. I was immediately, spectacularly wealthy, but the money was merely a tool. The true prize was the DSC-SM patent, now legally and publicly mine. I immediately used a portion of the funds to purchase the land surrounding the desolate cabin in Wyoming, the base of operations where I had found my resolve, transforming that isolated hostile terrain into the protected permanent site of the Stone Geophysics Institute. This was not merely revenge. It was an act of profound physical reclamation, turning the ground of my exile into the foundation of my legacy. My first official act as the undisputed inventor of the DSC-SM was a strategic one, designed to ensure Robert Vance's further and complete ruin. I instructed Vivian Greer to file an immediate, definitive legal opinion with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, citing the now publicly acknowledged fraud regarding the DSC-SM and the material risks of Project Chimera. The opinion argued that Robert Vance had engaged in massive securities fraud by knowingly presenting false environmental data derived from a stolen and manipulated model, to secure the private equity funding. The move ensured that Robert would face not just civil suits from his former investors, but a looming federal criminal investigation, effectively stripping him of his personal freedom and any residual financial assets. The reaction from the scientific and corporate communities was overwhelmingly supportive. I was immediately appointed as an advisor to the U.S. Climate Integrity Board, an agency I had only dreamed of approaching years prior. My story became the gold standard for ethical scientific warfare. I was no longer the unstable outcast. I was the fearless scientific vigilante who used data to bring down a corrupt corporate titan. My reputation, once poisoned, was now purified by fire. Robert Vance, stripped of his CEO title and facing criminal charges, was left completely exposed. His former investors, now armed with the court-mandated retraction and the SEC's attention, filed a massive suit to recover their losses, demanding the forfeiture of Robert's personal assets. The man who had smiled as he cast me out was now facing the total annihilation of his financial life. He was a corporate ghost, his charm replaced by the desperate, hunted look of a man whose life was collapsing under the weight of his own calculated lies. The earth, the unyielding truth I served, was finally settling the score. The subsequent years solidified my new identity as a figure of global scientific authority and institutional power. The Stone Geophysics Institute, based on the reclaimed land in Wyoming, became a prestigious, independent research center dedicated to applying the DSCSM model ethically, focusing on sustainable energy and conservation initiatives. I didn't return to the traditional academic or corporate world. I built a new world where scientific truth was the only currency. My focus was on systemic correction, using my new financial and scientific power to prevent the kind of fraudulent activity Robert Vance embodied. I established the Robert Vance Ethical Leadership Fellowship, a scholarship at his alma mater, Stanford Business School, targeting students who demonstrated a profound commitment to environmental ethics and corporate transparency. The fellowship was named with icy precision after Robert Vance. The public announcement, handled by my institute, stated that the fellowship was established to honor the painful lessons learned regarding ethical vigilance in high-stakes corporate environments. I did not praise him. I did not condemn him. I simply used his name as a permanent, public synonym for the consequences of moral failure. Every year, ambitious, ethical young students would receive funding in his name, dedicating their careers to correcting the very kind of fraud he committed. The move was brilliant in its subtlety and devastating in its finality, ensuring his legacy was not success, but a perpetual, humiliating reminder of his deceit. The criminal investigation led to Robert Vance's eventual arrest and conviction. Facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of financial fraud and regulatory violation. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay massive restitution, effectively stripping him of every remaining asset. The man who cast me into homelessness was now facing the absolute loss of his freedom and his wealth. I did not attend his sentencing. My battle was over. The legal system had served the truth, and the financial restitution ensured the completion of my purpose. I was now free to focus entirely on my life's true work, unburdened by his shadow. I had transformed the darkest period of my life into the foundation of a greater, more meaningful legacy, proving that even from the deepest ashes of betrayal, a powerful, unassailable life can be rebuilt. The years that followed were dedicated to expanding my new ethical legacy. The Stone Geophysics Institute became the benchmark for technological integrity in environmental assessment. I had achieved everything I set out to do. My professional honor was restored. My invention was securing the future of ethical energy, and the man who betrayed me was paying the full price for his malice. My life was defined by my own making, not by his attempts to destroy it. I often spoke publicly, using my story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a blueprint for strategic resilience. I taught young scientists and entrepreneurs that when faced with betrayal, the most powerful weapon is not rage, but unassailable objective data. Robert Vance thought I was broken, but I had simply used the time of my exile to become a superior version of myself. A scientist who understood the deep, terrifying consequences of moral compromise. I received one final, unexpected piece of correspondence, exactly 3 years into Robert Vance's prison sentence. It was a formal notification from his attorney, a routine document detailing the liquidation of his final personal retirement accounts to meet the restitution order. Tucked into the envelope, however, was a small, unmarked piece of paper, a handwritten note, utterly devoid of the old charm, replaced by a defeated emptiness. Amelia, I saw the announcement for the fellowship. You won. The truth won. I hope you realize what you did. You didn't just rebuild your life. You used my name to remind the world of my shame. I don't beg for forgiveness. I just acknowledge the finality. I have nothing left. I looked at the note and felt a profound, cold detachment. He wasn't begging for mercy. He was confirming the complete, permanent success of my vengeance. He was confessing that the memory of my unyielding truth was his eternal punishment. He was hiding from the truth he had once created, and I was the one who had engineered his total exile. The shame was gone, replaced by the unshakable certainty of my self-worth. The years rolled on, marked by the successful implementation of the DSC-SM model in ethical projects across the globe. My work became my sanctuary. I had successfully transformed a massive personal trauma into a massive societal benefit. The Robert Vance Ethical Leadership Fellowship continued to thrive, funding brilliant ethical students whose careers were built on correcting the very kind of fraud he committed. His name was now inextricably linked to the necessity of moral integrity, a permanent, humiliating testament to his failure. I found a quiet joy in the solitude of my life, a peace that was never possible in the chaotic, high-stakes environment of corporate San Francisco. I had learned that the deepest connection I needed was with the unyielding, objective reality of the earth, a reality Robert Vance had mocked and ignored, and one that ultimately delivered his doom. I often held quiet evenings on the high desert plains of Wyoming, the home of my institute, looking out at the vast, silent landscape. I realized that my revenge was not the destruction of Robert Vance. It was the absolute, total reclamation of my identity and my life's work. He thought I was broken and homeless. He was simply blind to the quiet, analytical strength that lay beneath the surface. He forgot that the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose but the truth. The final, complete victory was not the money, the patent, or the prison sentence. It was the unshakable peace I had earned, the quiet triumph of building a life from the ashes of betrayal, proving that even from the deepest void, scientific truth and strategic resolve can conquer the most powerful lies. My life today is proof that the greatest professional successes can be born from the deepest personal betrayals. I stand here, not as the discarded researcher, but as Dr. Amelia Stone, the founder and director of the Stone Geophysics Institute, a woman who used scientific integrity to dismantle a corrupt corporate empire. Robert Vance, the man who cast me out, is a convicted felon whose name is now permanently etched into the public record as a symbol of failure. He betrayed me, smiling, and thought I would simply vanish. Instead, I became a quiet, relentless force. I followed the unyielding, objective truth of the geology he tried to suppress. From heartbroken and homeless, I became powerful and feared, not because I sought malice, but because I wielded the absolute, non-negotiable power of scientific fact. I rebuilt my life from ashes, using my stolen invention as the cornerstone of an ethical legacy. The final humiliation for Robert Vance is the perpetual shame of the fellowship, a permanent reminder that his moral bankruptcy paved the way for my enduring integrity. The lesson I share is this: when they steal your foundation, look to the earth for truth. Use your knowledge, find the unassailable evidence, and fight the system with data. From the ashes of betrayal, you can build a structure so strong it will make your betrayer irrelevant forever.